Time now for some instant analysis with our insiders, Elliotte, Friedman, and Johnston. And a fairly significant day on Thursday as the NHL and the NHLPA jointly announcing that officially Phase 3 of the return plan will be in place commencing July 10th. That means that formal training camps can take place for the 24 teams participating in the upcoming Stanley Cup playoffs. So a big day, a story you helped break, CJ.
Yeah, and I think it's especially big for players because, I think one thing a lot of guys have said throughout how long this pause has gone is they've just struggled with the uncertainty. And even as, yes, we got into Phase 2, which is, voluntary workouts. We have had guys return this week to their team facilities. There's still a whole bunch of players still over in Europe, those scattered around North America, not in their playing cities. And now knowing July 10th, it at least frames for them, when they might travel and kind of makes this a little bit more real. I think what it also does, though, Elliotte, is it does now define a very specific set of time where the NHL and the NHL Players Association have to reach agreement on a whole host of issues to give these players something to vote on before we know for sure whether the season will be resumed.
You know what, Chris? It's like the iceberg, right? It's only 1/7 above water and the rest of it is below the water. You don't really know just how much you're dealing with here. The amount of work that they have to get done in the next month, guys, is staggering. They have to pick the hub cities. They have to finish the protocols for safety and testing, and not only for Stage 3, but for Stage 4, which is games as well. They're not going to want to approve like two different times. They want to get as much of it done as they possibly can. They want to work on making sure they get not necessarily a CBA done, but at least the framework of one, so the players know what the financial rewards will be of playing. So, you know what, guys, I think there's a lot of work to do. It's a big grind. I think there's a lot of people working hard to make sure that they get this done. But as people tell me all the time, we have no idea the amount of detail that has to get done behind the scenes to make sure this can happen. And you think a month is a long time, Dave? It's not that long. They have to get a vote done. So as Chris says, everyone can come back.
Yeah, listen, that's a great point. There's a ton of logistical hurdles still to climb to make sure we actually do have a resumption of play in the National Hockey League. Do either of you guys have a sense of how long these training camps might take place? Because here we are right now, it's June 11th, and informal training camps are taking place. Guys are getting access to training facilities as well as some sheets of ice. That means they could be on the ice for a full month before the official Phase 3 begins. So does that reduce the amount of time we're going to see as far as the official training camps?
It depends on what you define as training camp. CJ, you tell me if you're hearing different, but I'm hearing it could be 2 weeks at your city, and then another 6 days in the hub, which includes the 2 exhibition games. So do you define that as 3 weeks of training camp or 2 weeks plus exhibition games? That's kind of what I'm hearing, though. From what I understand, CJ, anything could be changed.
Yeah, that's consistent with what I've heard. And I think what's interesting here is the league is totally leaving it up to the players. Essentially, they're saying to the players, you tell us, give us the feedback. How do you guys feel? Obviously, as they go deeper into Phase 2, do you feel ready? And I do think that there will be some degree of wiggle room to reduce that time, or I guess potentially extend it. Although I think given the amount of time now that these rinks are going to be open, if anything, we're going to see the camps shortened a little bit rather than lengthened.
So what might be a target date for the actual resumption of the qualifying round of the Stanley Cup playoffs could be around July 31st, August 1st. So that could be another date to circle on the calendar. Meanwhile, CJ, something you touched upon, I follow you on Twitter, and one of the things you were touching upon is that the Canadian teams might be trying to figure out things as far as how they're going to start Phase 3, whether they'll start it in Canada on our side of the border or go down to the United States. What can you tell us about that?
Well, this is a huge issue for the Canadian teams coming back, and especially teams like Montreal, say, and Calgary that don't have very many players currently in their market, about how you negotiate this, because as we know, there's a 14-day window for anyone returning to the country. I think what ideally the NHL would like to see happen here is the quarantine period that any players returning have to observe, expanded to include the arena. So how this would look, for example, is if Johnny Gaudreau came back to Calgary, he could be at his apartment or his house. He could be, at the facility where the Flames are training for 14 days, but he wouldn't be going anywhere else. He wouldn't be mixing with the public. He wouldn't be doing his own groceries, those types of things. And I think there's a valid argument for this. I know some people want to say special treatment for athletes, but let's consider, these athletes are all being tested, whether they have symptoms or not, in Phase 2 training, and that would be the case as well for Phase 3. And so, I think that there would be a pretty responsible way to do this. I know the BC government has said that's something they would support if it were to happen for the players in Vancouver. And if this doesn't come to pass, it's two things. It completely rules out any possibility for a Canadian hub city. And then those teams that are maybe looking at taking their training camps to the U.S. instead of having them here in Canada to not have their players off the ice for that 14 days. I've even heard, Dave, a couple teams might be looking at Anaheim, of all places, where they have a nice new practice facility there to hold their training camps as a way to get around this. And so, I think this issue has to be resolved pretty soon for both the players and the teams. And I can't really tell you which way the government's going to fall on it.
It's part of that time window that Elliotte was alluding to. Again, the next month, there's so much to be determined before officially July 10th rolls around. So much talk, so much focus, guys, on the players, as it should be. But what about the coaches? Because they might be more vulnerable from a medical standpoint with this pandemic. You have 12 coaches, Elliotte, who are 55 or over. You have 5 coaches who are 60 and over. What's going to happen with them?
Well, Dave, I started looking into this because last week the commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, was on TNT, and he basically said that we might have to take some action to protect the coaches, whether they like it or not. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they talked about was maybe certain coaches of a certain age couldn't coach from the bench, or would they all have to wear masks? And one of the real prominent NBA coaching agents spoke out and said, we don't agree with this. So I've been checking up recently with Michael Hirschfeld, who's the executive director of the NHL Coaches Association. And one of the things he said was, and the league is on board with this, is they're going to leave it up to the individual coaches to decide how they feel. And I think that that's going to be a situation where that's what we're going to have. Coaches and executives who will be invited to be in the bubble, I think they're going to be able to decide how they personally feel about returning this year. And
the same testing protocols, I imagine, they would have, such as the players, pre-game, post-game, etc.
I think anyone in the bubble is going to be subject to that.
All right, so mark it down. Thursday, a significant day in the National Hockey League as we circle July 10th, the official beginning of Phase 3 formal training camps for the 24 teams involved in the upcoming Stanley Cup playoffs. Thanks again to our insiders, Elliotte Friedman and Chris Johnston. Thanks, fellas.